and welcome to Food Feels and Banana Peels. I'm your host, Laura Pfeiffer. Thanks for joining me. This podcast is all about providing a different perspective on health and disease for you to consider. It's about inspiring you to take control of your own health, advocate for yourself, and be curious about how you can support yourself holistically and naturally so you can live each day happier and healthier than the last. Welcome today, everyone, to Food Feels and Banana Peels. I'm really honored to have another special guest on the show today. And today I'm talking with Kathy Fisher. Kathy is joining us out west from Alberta, Canada. And Kathy has had a very, very interesting journey, as many of the people you're seeing who are showing up on my podcast with health and disease. And she has offered kindly to share her experience with us today. So I'm really, really grateful for that. So thank you so much, Kathy, for joining us. It's really an honor to interview you and to share your story.
Well, it was a pleasure. And it kind of leaps off. Like I ended up mentoring 4 medical students, which made me think about this whole experience. So this feels like a nice progression.
You're a very, very interesting woman who has had quite a journey, lots of fun stuff and lots of other stuff that have provided teaching and learning for you. So, Kathy, how about introducing yourself, first of all? I couldn't possibly do it justice.
Yeah, in a nutshell, I'm an Easterner with roots in the Maritimes in Quebec. And I moved to Alberta in the late 80s. I'm an active person, an athlete, growing up started women's rugby and traveler and kind of a risk taker and a curious person and, believe in love. And so it had a pretty cool, I guess one of the distinctive things growing up is I had a lot of very, very interesting elders who were interested in natural things, like Adele Davis and everything. So they were always into really good diets, composting, and alternate ways of, good food, So just, yeah, different ways of seeing the world. So, and I was a lawyer and I'm a poet, performance poet, and I guess like I worked it out. I'm kind of mostly a documentarian. Like I really believe truth is stranger than fiction. So I'm really into nonfiction. I sat on art, sports, nonfiction festivals, love music, sing, perform with musicians. I guess I write out of the body. So what's relevant in terms of, all these sort of other experiences is they kind of inform my arts practice. Law is kind of like about mind. So I was always into truth and justice. And then, so law was good. Poetry is really about truth. And then I ended up doing quite a bit of shamanic work, studying with Barry shamans, which I found very, very invaluable. Yeah.
And we are going to get into that a little bit later on your journey because that's been an instrumental part of your journey as well. And we definitely want to go there. You're a multi-talented woman, and all of those different arts and facets of what you do are so interesting. And your journey itself that you're going to share with us is very, very interesting, a reflection of you and the pretty cool soul that you are. So Kathy, tell us where it began. Tell us where your health experience began when you began to notice that you were no longer in balance and disease was starting to manifest in your body.
Well, one thing which I perhaps didn't say in our pre-interview is when I was a little kid, I had tonsillitis. So I was very, very sick with tonsillitis for about 60 or 70 days. And then in those days, I went to the hospital, and they took out my tonsils and adenoids, and that was a common practice. I had no health issues, like going forward, like zero. That's just something to circle back to. And then I ended up moving out to Alberta and was a smoker. We all smoked in those days and we all drank and drove and all those kinds of crazy things, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, I had a live-in partner and to this day, I think was allergic to him or something. I got all these like bladder infections. So I had constant bladder infections and, and I had very good hygiene, personal hygiene, but it was, yeah. So the doctor gave me this running prescription for antibiotics, which I thought was really not good because I'm someone who really is very, very conservative about my use of drugs. Like I'm really not someone who runs to the prescriptions. So I think that trashed, ultimately, I think that kind of really had a negative impact on my microbiome. But at the time, I reluctantly followed, because I did have those bladder infections, right? And I never had them after that relationship. So it was fascinating to me.
So your journey begins here. How long ago?
So that
Yeah,
was in the 80s. Okay, so
80s.
87, 88.
Okay.
And then what happened is I did get, so I ended up getting asthma, I guess 89. So I had quite a few life things that were quite stressful, but I ended up getting asthma and not being diagnosed because I didn't really know what it was. And I actually was with some girlfriends at a reunion in BC, and I'm having a hard time breathing and I'm coughing and everything. And actually, it's quite in a serious asthma attack by the time, like I couldn't even lie down. I was like, I could barely tip back. So then, when I get to the hospital, and then the doctor is screaming at me, like, why did you wait so long? Why did you wait so long? And I didn't even realize I had asthma because they had never been, quote, diagnosed. And I'm one of those, I think I'm like so many people, you just go, okay, you just adjust. Okay, adjust. Anyway, long story short is there, I was hospitalized for pretty much a week. And I had this thing called a pneumomediastinum, which is where a pneumothorax is when your lung collapses, and pneumomediastinum is when it ends up sort of imploding on one side, like your air sacs burst, but the air leaks in and pushes your heart over, and then it kind of bubbles up. So what was interesting about that was, I guess little kids have it. They go, "Oh, we've never seen anybody your age have it." So I was a little, so the doctors came to check me out. But I pretty much had it, like, so I was in the hospital for a week and had a total out of body experience, like, the tunnel of light and all that stuff. I mean, it was quite fascinating.
How old were you at the time, Kathy?
Maybe early 30s, I guess. 32,
Okay.
32.
Okay, so
Yeah,
32 years old and you're having
yeah.
this major um
Incident.
yeah.
But what was cool, I photocopied my report. Being a lawyer, you get the report. So I got that. So that was a very, advice to everybody. Always get your medical records and have them handy. Like now everything's online, but it doesn't matter because doctors only read the top sheet. So the more informed you are, I also keep my blood records. Some people are not that interested, but I always would get my letters, like from any specialists and so on and so forth. Anyways, yeah, so I ended up, blowing a hole in my lung and all that. And I wasn't allowed to fly, so I had to spend 3 weeks in Vancouver, and it was quite a humbling experience, I guess, because I wasn't as scared maybe as I ought to have been. But anyway, so for the next year and a half, I was very unstable. My lungs were very unstable, so I had three hospitalizations. But it ended the relationship. I mean, it was partly, there were, let's say, external factors that, and emotional factors and all that played
Yes.
into it, I guess.
And that's where I wanted to chat for a moment before we continue on, because you said a few things like, oh, it was, it was high stress, and oh, I had these relationship issues. When you started and you said that in the beginning you had having these, was it UTIs that you were
Yeah,
having? So you're
yeah,
having these UTIs, and I've actually had a similar experience with fungal infections that our body sometimes are rejecting our partners or the people that we choose to be with, and maybe we don't listen, or we don't, for whatever reason, we think that it's okay to be with this person, or whether we're connecting based on a wound, whatever it is, and then our
yeah,
physical bodies actually tell us differently. So if there are any women out there, I think this is important to say right off the bat. If you are experiencing that with a partner, if you're coming into a new relationship and you're having these issues, whether it be, UTI infections or fungal infections or things going on down there that maybe that's not normal for you, it's important to look into the energetic aspect of that partnership, because there could be something not in alignment there that's actually causing that physical reaction for your body. And then when you went into the constant antibiotics, I had constant antifungals, and month after month, like this rolling prescription, right? And what it does, like you said, is it just messes up the gut microbiome, right? And 80%
yeah,
of our serotonin is produced in the gut, and our main immune system cells are produced in our gut. And so when we begin to take these long rounds of antibiotics and things, it really messes up our gut, and therefore that kind of gut brain connection, and the entire body
yeah. And also,
itself.
yeah, and I had to go on steroids too, which also screwed up my bones. And then ultimately, I'd say if I look at that relationship, it was emotionally abusive, but that's kind of was my that was really my family. So I didn't really notice, like, so I didn't notice, because, and then I thought, oh, you made your bed, you got to, you moved across the country, and, I'm with Jack Nicholson, and, he's like, oh, he's a bit rough on the outside or whatever. I mean, so I had a lot of, I've been able to reflect on it. And whatever our dynamic was, I'd say that person, usually it's a good person, but we push each other in a bad way, so like, it was an out of balance kind of a thing.
Right.
But that wasn't at the time. I wouldn't really have seen it, too much. And I didn't really have particularly good skills at standing up for myself, so that wasn't, that was not, I didn't learn those, and I hadn't learned those yet.
Till later,
It's taken a
yes.
long time.
I get it for sure. So then we moved toward the asthma, the onset of the asthma. Were you still in that relationship when that asthma was taking place?
Yeah, practicing as a lawyer, and I can't say that was like I wasn't, my values weren't aligned with the place I was working,
Okay.
so I got sick, and then I had to go through all this weird stuff with disability, and it was just really weird because I had a mortgage with the one company was trying to prove that I wasn't sick, and the other one saying I was, like, so I had all these bizarre things going on multi levels, and like I say, I was in the hospital 3 times, and then many, many interpersonal things were going on, which we don't have to get into, but it's like a big storm. And then I've never been in the hospital since, never had to go since. But what I have been able to do since, I got into acupuncture and some of these alternative things, and I've even been in acute asthma attacks caused by forest fires, where I've been able to get out of the acute part where I would have had to go to a center, let's say, and get mask and the ventilator and so on, and never had to do that again. So
Amazing.
that's what's so cool to me about that is, and acupuncture. And then what I did learn a little bit and more going forward was, in Chinese medicine, sort of like lungs and guts are metal, which is, and that grief, so there was a lot of like unexpressed grief. So I think we're,
Yes. Yes. And as we talk about that with the asthma, the
yeah.
grief being held in the lungs, and then perhaps something with the throat.
Okay. So what happened actually with that person is I did communicate some really deep insights, which I actually got through this acupuncture with this man and a woman. And then I was completely like, you're too kooky. That's too kooky for me, kind of thing.
Okay.
So I took it all back in. I took it all that in. Like I go, oh my God, I got this big, I took it in, and then it had to come out somewhere. So I really felt like that just processing that. And then it ended up coming out through my guts. What I thought was the safest place was like not.
Right.
I won't say I spill my guts. And then it's like, okay, now I have to take all that shame and all that whatever it is insight in, and then yeah, and then it's stewed in there, and then and then I got really sick with Crohn's, like really sick, but it was kind of slow coming, and then I realized, oh, the asthma, all those things were just like they were like the training wheels for this other experience.
So let's talk about symptoms and things as Crohn's began to present itself. For people who don't know, Crohn's is quite a severe disease that we're seeing more and more in the population because it affects the body's ability to extract nutrients properly from our foods and then to release them into the bloodstream for properly packaged for the cells to use, basically in a nutshell. So you're not getting the nutrition from your food that you're eating, and oftentimes leaky gut and things are associated with
Yeah, and then
that
you're
as
also
well.
getting things. So you get I mean, because I got allergies with the
Right.
asthma. So what happens with the guts is your guts get leaky, so your stuff is going in your bloodstream. So you're
That's right.
kind of in a hyper. It's an another
It's an
autoimmune.
autoimmune, exactly. Another autoimmune, which we're seeing more and more and more of these days. So, what were your signs and symptoms that began to give you an indication that things were out of balance there?
I was dating this rich lawyer in Boston. I remember I had to leave a restaurant. It was just unbelievable gut pain, like just pain. And I'm not used to having stomach aches. I never had stomach aches. And then you just have, basically your hemorrhage, like you get mucus and blood. And it's like having a period out of your butt, basically. It's so socially not something you want to talk about.
For sure.
Like, and foul smelling on top of like salt, like bad smell. So like in any public place, it's horrible. And then you can have explosive diarrhea. Like I worked in the courthouse. Yeah, so it's really uncomfortable. And then also when I was really at the most sick, I was throwing up on water. Like I couldn't even have water. Like there's nothing that my body would accept. Like nothing.
Okay.
And then I just lost 45 pounds. And then I was hemorrhaging out, and my hemoglobin, which should be 120, it was going out like 95, 86, 70, whatever, 68. And then when it was 54, I had to go get a blood transfusion. The day before I went in, somebody had mad cow disease in the donor pool. In Alberta, I'm talking to the nurse saying, I don't know if I really want to take blood, because they make you sign for each bag. And so it's pretty daunting. And then she said, you don't have a choice. Subsequently, at another doctor review my file, he says, I don't understand why you didn't have massive organ failure. Like you should have had. But the reason I didn't, I believe, I was doing acupuncture with Stephen Ong. And then he kind of kept me from crashing. Like,
Okay.
so he goes, oh, he looked at my ear, and the guy's amazing. Did this amazing diagnostic. So I was seeing him, and I think my doctor was out of town, and seeing him, he kept me kind of like alive, I'd say. Like he kept me up, from crashing, going, into the massive organ failure. And then my doctor gave me three options. And he said, option number one, we'd like to admit you to the hospital right away and cut out your colon. You only have 6 inches of healthy colon. So we want to
Oh.
cut out 6 inches. And I'm like, okay, I've only been sick a year and a half. Like, my body wants to heal. Okay, clearly something's not good, but that's not my start position.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so plan B was put me on autoimmune therapy, which for me didn't feel like he'd be like an AIDS patient. I thought, anyway, that just seemed counterintuitive to me. So
So
option
lots of
two,
pharmaceuticals, right? Like
yeah,
pharmaceutical based treatment. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
That you see all the side effects, obviously, that could
yeah, and then
potentially happen there. Yeah.
yeah, and even the drug they had me on this kind of aspirin, ASA aspirin thing. One of the side effects was bleeding. And then at one point I went to yogurt treat and I stopped taking that and I stopped bleeding. I mean, it's like, because half the time you don't know what the cause is, right? And even along the way, at one time I had a breast infection, I had to get surgery, get things taken out, but people attributed everything to the Crohn's. Like when you have one thing, they just attribute it all to that, right? Like that's
Right.
why your white blood cells are high, etc. But just to go back to the options for you was get a blood transfusion and go on like big doses of steroids. Like being on steroids, I mean, I don't like them, but I mean, they're the drug that really work. Like, so they alleviate your symptoms and make you insane. You can have, so they gave me, 3 months where they're like, oh, you can have psychotic breaks. I mean, you're nuts. Like I had visions, and I was like, I did not drive. I did not drive. I did nothing where it put anybody else in danger. It was like, so you go from being so weak to being on these drugs that make you like insane, like hyper. It's like having 500 cups of coffee. And when I was at home, I would let my energy into my house. And if I had to leave the house, I had to gather it all up and put it in my body kind of thing to even go out. So you're exhausted and your whole body's depleted, intellectually, but your energy is like insane because of the drugs,
Mm-hmm.
like and you get all these side effects like boils. And then I tried to reach out to the Crohn's Colitis Society, and it wasn't a very rewarding experience for me, but I meet, I had friends who had had that illness, and they had used chiropractors and naturopaths, and also gave, there is a bit of a community. So I ended up
Mm-hmm.
hearing some stories from people who survived, who didn't do the sort of mainstream medical route. Because for me, like having my colon cut at that point in my life, I thought, I don't want to live like that. Like if I end up there, yeah. So the deal I made with myself is that this acupuncturist, um, Michael, I think Green something, he had a chronic pain institute in British Columbia. And
Okay.
I said, okay, before I have that surgery, like I will try to heal myself. And he sort of had this chronic pain institute. So I thought, well, this isn't chronic pain, but it's a chronic condition.
Mm-hmm.
I will go there, spend the money and go there for 10 days if I have to before I'd have surgery. And that gave me like a little bit of space. And then I also went to see, there's a psychic guy, Dan, his name's Dan, here in town. And he kind of, anyway, he sees your energy fields and all this kind of stuff, which for some people might sound a bit odd, but he was amazing and very, very perceptive. And I decided I didn't want to make sure I didn't have cancer. I thought, okay, if I got cancer or something, I don't want to mess around. But it was sort of for me what I needed, what I was seeking is space to try to let the body support the body in healing itself, right? And I read all the stuff like medical literature, like the stuff they gave you, the food supplements were all corn based and like they're nuts. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so you cannot heal on sugar and corn and all. So
Mm-hmm.
I got a juicer and you know, and so one of my positive experiences went to this yoga retreat and everything was just juice for the whole yoga retreat.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody comes in there and they're all like, oh my God, and going down. Well, I was like in a diminished state, like every day, like I juice every 2 hours and it was like in a supported environment. So I like I was thriving. It's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to see people and then I realized, as long as your body has some basic nutrients, like regularly, and then that was the way that I congest it with the least amount of sort of trauma, while I was letting my guts kind of heal on the inside.
Right.
Because basically, your inside of your colon is like your skin on the outside. So it's just like, somebody scratched, you wiped out and scratched, and anything that goes by causes it to bleed. So you want to
Mm-hmm.
bleed. Just
Because
want
it's
to heal.
was it ulcerative colitis as
Ulcerative
well?
colitis. Well, they said ulcerative colitis, and then they later go Crohn's, and like really,
Well,
the only difference is one is your colon only, and the other thing is your entire digestive tract.
your small intestine and everything, and that's where your Crohn's is, and you're nourishing your body with whole foods during your retreat, and you're finding that things are improving.
Well, I was doing it at home anyway, but I'm just saying being in community where I wasn't doing all the juicing, because
Right.
juicing, I had a really crappy juicer to start. Get a good juicer.
Yes.
That's
Get a
like,
good Vitamix. I
buy a
agree.
good
It's
one. Yeah,
so
get a good one.
so
But I had
important.
one that was very difficult to clean. So, one of the insights I got in there too is like there's a certain level of fatigue that you have, and like you can make a cup of tea or drink a cup of tea, but you could not do both. And I think so, really, really like, so for me to have that, like I'm a high energy person, and to have that level of fatigue and exhaustion, and also it was extremely humbling. And I think in all of that, I had two friends who actually really got what was going on. Because most people, you're dealing all the time with their fear, so that
Mm-hmm.
was, so I only
Mm-hmm.
had two, like one who would make the cup of tea so I could drink a cup of tea. Like she
Mm-hmm.
would come
Mm-hmm.
over afterward. And then another girlfriend and I just said, I don't care if I die. I just don't care. I'm so done. Like I feel done. And if one little thing, like I could have got an ingrown toenail, I said, I don't care. And I understand. It's kind of like I walked to that edge, and then where you realize you could just die, and it's like no big deal. Like you're kind of on this little, and then she just said, "Yeah, you look sicker than my aunt who's had cancer." Like she was the only one who reflected back to me how bad it was, because everybody
Mm-hmm.
else was more afraid,
Mm-hmm.
and then you end up taking care of them.
So how about you? Like, how were you feeling mentally, emotionally, having come from, starting with these kind of UTIs and then moving into this severe puncture in the lung and then moving now into this severe digestive imbalance that is affecting every single cell of your body? How are you mentally, emotionally feeling at this point?
Well, I was working. I mean, the thing is, I was working up through a lot of it. Like I was working doing contract work, and I had no short-term memory. Like, so like I had to write everything down. So totally, because what happens is you don't have any oxygen, right, in your blood when your hemoglobin's that low. So I had no short-term memory. And then I also would just cry, like, when I was like there, this place, like if I had to call somebody, it'd take me, it's not so much at work, like I had to take time off work. But there was a time where I just like, if I had to call someone, I would just get off the phone and cry for like, so this doctor, again, the guy who said I should have had an organ failure, I said, I felt quite low. It's quite low. He said, you would have been clinically depressed, like clinically depressed. And then there was, I think one doctor said, want to put me in antidepressants or something. And I was like, it pissed me off so much. I said, no, no way. I said, like, they've taken my body, they're not taking my mind. So my anger kind of was like a, energy. And
Fuel,
so
yeah.
it kind of motivated me to go, okay, like the best I can be in the Western medical system is not sick. So why want to be well? So
Mm-hmm.
what models of wellness can I use? And so I thought, okay, who
Yes.
suffers? Who suffers? Lack of short-term memory, lack of oxygen to the brain, diarrhea, dehydration. That, and I said, okay, mountain climbers who climb Mount Everest, right? Summiting ones, and then ultra marathoners, right? Like the guys who go really far. So, because you have electrolyte imbalance and all these
Mm-hmm.
things. So then what I started doing is reading that literature and going, okay, so what do they do? These extreme athletes. like what happens when you're starving and you can't get any nutrition is your body starts devouring your big muscles. So I was losing all my strength. So
Yeah.
I had no strength in my quads. I couldn't walk upstairs. So
Right.
when they wanted to put me in the hospital, like I had tickets to the world figure skating. And I told the guy, I said, look, I'm just going to lie around in a hospital. Like I might as well go to the world figure skating. If I'm going to die at the end of the week, I'll go to the hospital. But like I'm really just going to be sitting there watching figure skaters from 11 till whatever. And then I went to the medical, like they had a clinic, and I went to the clinic at Rexall Place. But I couldn't even walk up the stairs, and then I go, do I use the disabled washroom and stuff? Like I had to use my arms to get upstairs, okay, because that's the weakness.
Mm-hmm.
So two insights from there. One is that I'd read a book, about Holocaust victims, like, and they went through the stages of starvation, and I realized like I'd gone through every single stage of starvation, like every single one. And I was like, wow. But I did it individually. So it was really weird, but then it gave me a context for what I kind of had a lived experience of.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went to the clinic and said, can I just rest? And then one woman was such a, goes, well, if somebody with a real problem comes in here, you're going to have to give up that bed. And I said, well, that's totally fine with me. And I'm like, because I didn't look sick, right? So I did look sick, like I was not great color, like, yeah. So I did celiac, like I'm not really celiac, but I'm better off without, like, so you try all these
Mm-hmm.
diets
Right.
too,
Right.
what kind of works, but I'm O blood type, I've done that work
Mm-hmm.
before. And so I am. So the other thing that had sort of trashed my guts, though, I think that contributed to it is, when I was in law school, in high school, I was vegetarian, but I wasn't what I call a proper vegetarian, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm an O type. And so I'm someone who does better if I eat like liver and red meat and
Meat. Yeah.
like that kind of stuff
Mm-hmm.
and green.
Yeah.
And I lost, because of that, I completely lost my desire for sugar. So what was fascinating is I could not eat sugar for about 2 years. Like I could not tolerate anything sweet. And then even when I was coming out of it, like starting to gain weight and everything, like if I ate anything that my body didn't like, 20 minutes, wicked headache, projectile vomit. Like, so if I
Okay.
curry, like I couldn't tolerate anything radical. Like it was
Right.
fascinating. So your body really lets you know what it can handle. Great. I would eat I'd make a Caesar salad every day and bacon. And I must have eaten half a pound of bacon. Like, and my body, I was like, don't get between me and the bacon. And then one day it just stopped. Like it's like, but I couldn't get enough. Like it was, those things were quite fascinating.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm finding it very interesting because a lot of the people that I'm speaking to, including myself, are O blood types, which I'm finding there are few correlations, and that is definitely one of them. And I too have had, this ethical dilemma with eating meat and the environment and trying to not eat it and actually physically experiencing in my body the effects, feeling weakness, fatigue, all of these things that I feel. And I'm a holistic nutritionist, so I know proper food combining, and I combine to make complete proteins, yet still I find that my body thrives. So for people who are listening who are O blood type, so we've also found a lot of empathic people are O blood types as well. Small sample sizes, right? But talking to enough people, finding a lot of empaths who are, when they're in balance, we're finding autoimmune things that are going on. Definitely, same with myself. They were throwing that around in the hospital when I was there too, and the correlation with it being so important to understand the physiology of your body, because what you feed your body is what helps your body to function. And so for us O's, many of us need those kind of animal-based proteins, and it doesn't mean that you need huge amounts, and we need a lot of greens and vegetables, right? We don't thrive on as much
But
grains
grains
and
were
things.
terrible. No, but grains were terrible. So what happened is,
Yeah.
when I read that book, Eating for Your Blood Type, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I recommend it, and it was basically this naturopath who watched people at these spas where they go vegetarian. And some people did really well and some people didn't thrive. And
Mm-hmm.
he asked the question. And so for me, what I discovered there, because a lot we learn, we try things. So a lot of things like I ate lentils, and they weren't good. They were either neutral or negative. So I was eating a lot of neutral and negative, but I wasn't eating, and I was always starving. Like, so there was a kind of low grade starvation. Like, and then So for me, for example, if I eat liver, I always go, it vanishes. Like I don't even, it never comes out. If I eat some calf liver, my body will, it just goes in and my body uses every little single piece. I mean, that's what
Mm-hmm.
it feels like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, just on the food note, like having been around, fast forward to people who with whom I was doing palliative care, is feeding the brain and feeding the heart. But salmon, avocado,
Mm-hmm.
good oils, all these things are really good for us.
They are.
And they're really, really good for people when you can't eat. Like, so when people are dying, they can't eat a lot, but they need to keep their brains going. So for me, the one of the great gifts we can give people who are in transitioning is so they can enjoy their or in that process. So they have mental energy.
Mm-hmm.
You can feed the brain with, salmon and these kinds of foods,
Yeah,
which
those healthy omega-3 fats, right?
yeah, and even liver, like because they can handle it. It's just not, but sugar, like so for me, the one thing that I really, really don't eat, or eat extremely rarely, although I love baking. I'm from New Brunswick, I'm a great baker. I got some old family recipes, but I'm like real butter, real sugar, whatever. So I'll bake a dessert, but I basically, I have maple syrup and yogurt. Like maple syrup is like my main sugar if I have
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is good for diabetics. It's trace mineral. I'm from Quebec, but yeah, like I really avoid sugar and other people's sort of, muffins and things like that because I just find those are the things that actually don't sit well with me.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, for sure. So you changed the nutritional component and you began to feel a little bit better. Tell us how that journey continued.
well, I did colonics, which was interesting, and then the guy said he didn't think I had colitis. He thought I had parasites. So here's someone who's like, he just based on your samples, like he's taking all this stuff, and he said, I don't think you have that. So that was fascinating to me again because I go and I'd been to Egypt, like I'd been to countries, and stuff like that. So I'd been exposed to parasites. So again, another, I guess it's like does it matter what it is? Like sometimes you go, what does it matter what it is? What is sort of the treatment? And so how do you move with it, right? Like when I was really, really sick and they wanted to cut my colon out, sort of the three things that I did was I'd say, juicing, and then I did the acupuncture and had some, which was amazing. And then I also went to see a shaman.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because I thought, well, $50 and 3 hour drive to Calgary. Like, what have I got to lose? My colon. So
Right.
really,
Exactly. Well
and
worth
then
it.
yeah, yeah. Did it my first journey and it was really powerful and that was really important and when I was doing the colonics it's like just what happens is you get completely out of shape if you're used to being an athlete or athletic or being fit because you're so tired, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then every organ hurts, like so then I did go, Kathy, you have to get fit, like you have to start, like you have to walk, you have to swim. So I did exercise. So I tried yoga, too painful, like all these things too painful. And then when I did exercise, because there's that feeling, the
Mm-hmm.
water holds your body.
Mm-hmm.
I could
Yeah, the
relax.
support. Yeah,
I
for
could
sure.
relax. And then I could
Mm-hmm.
do the exercise. And then also cooled you down so you never got too hot.
Mm-hmm.
So exercise was another tool that was really powerful in that coming back to myself. And then a few years later when I was more myself, back to work and everything and teaching, and I ended up doing belly dancing because I thought, oh, I've just disconnected so completely from my guts. Like I basically what I would do is I'd check in the morning and I go, oh my God, I'm in so much pain. So I'd check out. And then they gave me like a massive painkillers. And I just can't stand being stoned. So I lasted maybe a day or Tylenol threes or whatever. And then I said, I can't stand it. And then that's when I started writing. So I just would write. But when I was at my sickest, I'd say, like there was probably a time I thought I was going to die, like when I would go to sleep. So I couldn't like, and I was on those steroids, right? So I read a book a night. I'd get in the tub. I'd read Dorothy Gilman. I recommend her. I read a book a night. And then once the sun came up, I'd fall asleep because I felt like I wasn't going to die, like I was going to make it. But again, was I sharing these feelings with anybody? No, no. Like it was a very solitary kind of journey. And I think because it's your guts and it's so revolting at some levels, like, you know, and you do get feedback on that in public places. People go, oh my, it's really humiliating. So fast forward to when I broke my hip, it's like, wow, you can talk about this in mixed company and everybody's like very understanding. But there are other, it's like nobody wants to know. Like you don't want
Mm-hmm.
to tell, really, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody wants to know. And
So you suffer in silence a lot of times, and I think a lot of people with, IBS right now, different varying degrees, they're told it's idiopathic, meaning we don't know why you have it. You have something idiopathic, and it's this person over here doesn't go to the bathroom for 3 days, and this person over here is going to the bathroom 3 times an hour, and you have the same thing. We're calling it IBS, and we're not really sure why we have it here. So the energetic connection you came to discover, is that correct?
I'd say that, and acupuncture was amazing. Like so for me, like, and I take courses, so I'd studying shamanic, so I ended up like, not just doing it, but learning more. So I say in Chinese medicine, the insight that I think I got, because I lost my grandma and then my grandma, like a lot of, I had quite a few experiences which required proper grieving, didn't know how. And then I learned that, the metal elements like lung and large intestine are metal. So when they're out of balance, that's grief, right? So, and then so in Chinese medicine, you have five elements and each one has like, they're all on a continuum. And one might be happiness and sadness and grief. And then sort of the other end is reverence. So for me, if I went to sacred places or those kinds of things, that was like pulled me out of like that was what pulled me through. So it was a
Okay.
very interesting because it's not like depression and then elation, it's like it's not depression, it's actually grief. So learning how to grieve, I'd say that was a huge, huge piece. And then also acupuncture, not only does it sort of deal with your body, it can deal with like acute trauma. Like I dropped a drawer in my foot. It can actually help with that. I had shingles in my eye. It helped with that. But it can also work with your emotions and just like,
Mm-hmm.
the flow in your body, right?
Right.
And get into a good place. And but I always did blood work. So the thing that I did from Western medicine, which I always felt like, oh, the blood never lies. When I had my units of blood, like, and I had one bag that was really weird, that felt really uncomfortable and itchy. But I will say when I left the hospital, it's like I had the most profound sense of gratitude for people who donate blood. Like it was like,
Mm-hmm.
and then I find out blood's like a transmitter of soul. You go like
Mm-hmm.
you feel the love. It's like this unbelievable grace. And then I just remember my hands like I'd been to Costa Rica because I was freezing cold, and I never got a tan like because I was just yellow. I had no hemoglobin, right? So I'm with these people, all my photographs, I'm this scrawny little rib sticking out. And then when I got my blood transfusion, it's like I got a tan.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just remember feeling pink come into my hands again. It was like, so that was a very, very profound experience.
So would you say then, after journey with food and the acupuncture and you're doing shamanic training and shamanic healing, had the transfusions, where are you at in your healing journey?
It's kind of like 30 years on, right? It's almost 30 years, right? And so I did have one time when I went to a doctor and then I didn't want to have a colonoscopy because I was working on health law cases and health law articles. And when you have like a perforated colon, you're at high risk, all right? So like I thought, okay, if same stuff's coming out, like what's the point of going in there, right? So and I went to the doctor's office. I think, you're in a very, very vulnerable position and you have to make these huge decisions. And when you're refusing treatment, you don't want to be seen as a non-compliant patient. So I always had to walk this kind of line of like, so I do the blood work. And it, like even more recently, they wanted me to do an MRI or something like that. And my mom had died and I was feeling pretty fragile. And I just thought I can't handle the side effects. Like if one of those things goes wrong, I'm done. Like, and I have no symptoms. Like, right, when my mom was dying, of course, like what happens is I'm never real stressed and then it'll exacerbate the, if you
Mhm.
got a mask,
Right.
you can't hydrate. Okay, so it's not so great, but I can pull myself out of it. So if I
Hmm.
have an episode of colitis,
Hmm.
you know, I can just, tune up my food, do some acupuncture, like there's things I can do to just, turn it
Okay.
around.
Okay.
But if I'm not in my own set, like when my mom was dying, I was like sleeping, I was like in a horrific kind of personal circumstances, like where I didn't really have control over what I could eat or, where. And I was like, it was very like the most stressful. So my C-reactive protein shot up and that's, the inflammation in your body.
Hmm.
which can affect your heart. So then there's the aftermath now. So I'm trying to like, that's the other huge medical thing I'd say is, we live in Alberta. Or Canadians generally, we all have vitamin D deficiencies, and it's like the underdiagnosed thing, and it impacts like MS, all these kinds of things are really, it doesn't cure anything, but it sure as hell helps. Anyway, so I get shots, and I get like, I've had up to 750,000 IUs because I was trying to get my vitamin D up. It was precipitously low. So it was
Okay.
like 24, something like that. And it should be 80, and so it took me 2.5 years. So I monitor my vitamin D levels because I've got, this kind of disease. So I'm allowed to get the blood tests. Most people they won't let them get it. It's
Yes. Yeah.
crazy. But so I get vitamin D shots about every 2 months. It makes a huge difference because it goes to your hair, your nails, like your skin.
And it's also
So
it's
again,
also used for producing like hormone production and
yeah,
calcium removal for the body, important for the
yeah,
kidneys. Like there's a whole, yeah. Vitamin D is the vitamin that is, they say, is very much like a hormone, and it has
yeah.
effects on so many systems in the body. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Kathy. Checking vitamin D levels is very important because it can be a precursor to disease in many different areas of the body.
Well, the other thing that's so crazy is that was me. Okay, and then the other thing I did, well, I used to get vitamin B12 shots, like B
Hmm.
shots, and they were
Hmm.
amazing too.
Hmm.
Like, well, these are things that bring you up to normal, like, with the stress. So,
Yes.
so I do my blood work. So, like, every 2 months, I like now, I do the blood work thing. I just read that amazing book, Outlive by Atya, that doctor who's amazing. And he just talks about, kind of things we can do to tweak our systems because we'll all die of something. But he talks about a health span. And so for me, I want to have so you want to live long and well and die fast.
Yes. Agreed. I'm
Whatever.
same
And
same
so,
boat.
yeah, and I think with people with like I have a friend, he's funny. He has to have sodium reduced diets. He said no one is healthier than someone who's managing a chronic illness
Hmm.
well,
Hmm.
because you're aware of stuff, right? And it's
Right.
like so I'd say so I have a little fear. Like I was like, well, am I at risk of colon cancer? So I have that fear because it's in my family. So I do get colonoscopies. I mean, the weird thing about, for example, with that MRI, when I went in, did all the prep for the test, and I went in. And then when I was reading the side effects and supposed to sign off, I just started sobbing, just sobbing. Because it was, sort of like delayed thing with my mom dying. And then the nurse said, would you like to talk to the doctor? Because I felt really bad canceling because everybody knows hard to get in hospitals, hard to
Hmm.
get tests,
Hmm.
somebody's spot, right?
Hmm.
But some other guy across the way, they canceled his. So I thought if they can cancel his, I can cancel. And she said, no, no, no. If you don't feel good about it, it's okay.
Hmm.
I talked to the doctor and he said, well, what are you here for anyway? Like, he hadn't even read my file. And then he says, well, do you have active disease now? I said, no. He said, well, this is a zero value. Like, you have to come when you have active disease.
Right.
It's sort of like I made the right choice, but it's like, otherwise I would have had to go through with it and I wouldn't have gotten a result that meant anything, and I would have exposed myself to radiation.
Anyway.
So I guess these are things, trust your guts. Like, it's like
Yeah.
trust your guts
And
and
I
your,
think this comes back, Kathy, and I think each person that I've chatted with on the podcast, and it was a message from me as well in my first episode, is that advocating for our own health is the most important thing that we can do for ourselves. Understanding that we have choices and we get to make those choices, and that taking our health and handing it over to someone and saying, here, fix me and heal me, is like handing all of our power over and saying, I have no ability to do anything for myself. Here, I'll give it to you.
yeah.
You took control and you took your power and you decided to explore some different avenues instead of having 6 inches of your colon removed as they
No, no,
wanted.
left. They wanted to take out all
Left. They
colon.
want say they
They
wanted
would
to
leave me with,
leave you, and we have feet and feet
yeah,
of colon. Yes, yes. I don't know how many, but like
yeah, a
many,
lot.
many, many feet of colon. So yeah, so they wanted to leave you with 6 inches of colon, and instead you advocated for your own health. You said no, and you found these alternative practices that have helped you now to understand your body to a very different degree than you did before, that have forced you to look at the implements of health that help you to find balance and feel well, and then ultimately change your lifestyle for the most part to reflect what you've now learned about yourself through disease.
Yeah, because I don't even use the word disease. It's funny, eh? A tool for me of when something's not right, I get that pain.
Right.
So for me, same with the guts. It's just like, okay, Kathy, like you got to come back this way. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm really compassionate for anybody who's got it because there was a time, like for example, where if I ate anything, like anything that that wasn't good, like I would lose a day. It would be a day. I mean, I guess to understand, it's very challenging to understand the level of fatigue. So for me, that makes me when I'm with people who are, like say dying, doing palliative work, like when you have no energy, it's like a kind of no energy that you've never experienced as a
Mm-hmm.
normal person. We think it's hard to lose weight. It's so much harder to eat when you have no appetite. It
Mm-hmm.
is so hard. So
Mm-hmm.
I learned all these other ends of things, and then all these things that save me. I'd say like, carrot juice. It's like they're the last thing I want when I'm feeling good, and the first thing that I go to when I'm feeling not good, like
Mm-hmm.
miso soup. But I had times like when you have no hemoglobin, like I remember this one time I went for a walk or something, and I thought I can't even make it home. I had a block and a half, and I just wanted to lie down on the ground. It was like I
Mm-hmm.
hit a wall like in a marathon, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, can I call a cab? Like how to get a block and
Mm-hmm.
like I had to crawl home almost. It was like, and it's sort of this thing that even one can't believe it oneself. And when you're not there anymore, it's like it was a dream, whatever you would call it. And I never thought I could regain health, I'd say. Like you just feel like that's a permanent thing. You don't.
For sure. When you're in that state, yeah. So when I say disease, I really mean dis-ease.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
non-alignment of all of our bodies, our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And through all of our disease, I mean, eventually it manifests in the physical body. And for most of us, these imbalances in these other energetic areas have been there for a really long time. And we don't necessarily acknowledge them until the physical body begins
Yeah.
to scream, right? And it starts in a low murmur, and then it begins to talk louder, and then it screams. And then for some of us, like you, like me, like it just shuts it down, and it just is like, no, you're not walking, you're not doing anything. You now have to be with yourself and figure this out because you've gone so far out of
Overridden.
balance.
Yeah, and for me, it's like when you do professional schools, and I see it in med school and law school, it's like override. You're tired, override. You're hungry, override. You're
Mm-hmm.
override, 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 override. Right? You just override. You learn to
Yes.
override. And the
Yes.
other thing I was going to say too is when I was like in that on the stair, I had like total. I could see everybody's auras. I could see energy. Like I saw so much that I'd never. I was like, whoa. It was like too much information, but it was so unbelievable. Like the only thing I can liken to is like it was like a really long vision quest or something because it's like I was getting all this information and it's like wow, we can't live. Well, for me, I didn't want to live like that. It was too much sort of psychic information.
Stimulus. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, for
You know?
sure.
And the other thing to your point of the different bodies, I had dreams. My dreams are quite informative, but it's my emotional body for sure. I felt that like it manifested in my physical body, but the healing had to happen more in my emotional
Mm-hmm.
body, and
Right.
that would resonate. Because I mean, when I went to law school, like one thing I didn't do is sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just would go, oh, I'd play every sport, I did every activity, I'd study myself. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, I guess I just didn't sleep,
Just
like I
keep
just thought,
going.
okay, yeah,
Eventually, when you don't listen long enough, then it just shuts down and you have no ability to do anything, and you have to listen, right? And for many of us that end up in this severe disease state, it seems like that's the point that we get to. It's interesting. I had this discussion with Kylie Delfino, and she explained a lot about how we become these high functioning after traumas when we're younger. And so we can either go to the addictions avenue, some people do, or some of us become these high functioning people. So we're functioning very high in our lives, and eventually we get to this point. And for many of us, there's this physical crash that we have to then look into what the sources are, right? And like you mentioned, it was the emotional body that needed some attention for you, and everything, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, we're all interconnected. So when you began to look at those other areas of yourself and began to heal the emotion, and that was the same for me, then I began to heal in the physical body. But until that point, the physical body doesn't heal because you're not really finding the root of the issue.
Yeah, I think to your other speaker's point, there's a lot of trauma there too. When I went to university, my parents got divorced and my best friend went crazy in a and then I made a really good new friend at university and she was killed by a drunk driver. That was all within, a few months, right? And it's sort of like, so what it made me do is like, okay, I'm not going to just pick one person. Like, so I made choices about how I was going to live my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I can't count on anything, people, especially people staying alive. Like, so that for me became, so I could really relate to older people,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got a passion for World War One. I mean, so a lot of my other interests and that are informed by that. But then, and I sort of became like a workaholic, but it was also, so it was this way of going. And then when I went to law school, like my first year, there were 3 people who were killed in this freakish accident. My second year, one of my classmates in my study group of 4 people, he was in a murder suicide, or he and his mom died. We don't know exactly why. So I had all these kind of really untimely deaths and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I was 28, I had a long trail of death, which most of my friends didn't have
Mm-hmm.
up to my own age but again, the message at home was like when my best friend was killed by drunk drivers, my mom's like, after, stop moping, like 2 weeks after, even moping around for 2 weeks, like, get on with your life sort of thing. But never sitting down, like, I'm so sorry that you lost this.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right.
whatever. I mean, no blame on anybody, but people just teach you what they know, like, which
Well,
gave me a lot of insight into my mom, who'd had a lot of her own stuff, but never really just compartmentalized it, right?
right.
So,
And a lot of us aren't taught to properly process our emotions. It's certainly my generation, there are few, who actually had parents who could actually support us and teach us properly to acknowledge our emotions, to process our emotions, to be able to move through our emotions. Most of our parents stuffed their emotions down. So naturally, we stuffed our emotions and then stuff your emotions for your kids. And it's just like been this cycle that continues to go on that we're really trying to work now to break. We see now how important that emotional, energetic connection is to disease, and how if we begin to understand and properly process our emotions, then we can perhaps mitigate some of the disease that we're seeing today and even, prevent it.
yeah. Yeah. And so for me, that journey point, and I'm curious, so for me, once I could engage my mind into the extreme athlete thing, it was so fascinating. And then finding constructive tools instead of
Mm-hmm.
just not negative. And for me, that was very, very important in terms of, because I am someone who does have energy, like I've always had a lot of energy. Part of that's played. And even when I was really, really the least I've ever been, I had a huge spirit. So it's like, again, I had a massive spirit. Like that did not shrink. But I also had to receive love and help. Like I was not someone who was wanting to ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was very humbling.
It is
And
that part of the journey, isn't it? Those of us who give a lot and who become very independent and take care of ourselves and don't need anyone. And then all of a sudden we become into these disease states and all we can do is ask because we have nothing left to give ourselves. And it's a humbling experience when you have to begin asking for what you need. And you begin to understand who is really authentically there for you too and showing up in your life. That's a whole nother discussion. Kathy, so I'm wondering, like, as we kind of close up today, there are people that are suffering from Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. What would be some of the advice and the teaching and the learning that you have found on your journey? What would be the advice that you would be able to give them, perhaps in their healing journeys?
um, that's a big question.
Right?
So these are singular journeys, I trust yourself. And like for me, I never negated like the medical, like, even when I'd asked, one time I was in the hospital at the U of A and there's a library because the medical facilities there. So I was reading all the current medical literature on asthma as well as the alternative, and they're so close. Like, so to me, what I find is there's so many places of shared knowledge. They just use different language, and not everything works for every person. And like,
Mm-hmm.
so in Western, I think the Western world, we think, oh, everything's got to work the same for every person.
Mm-hmm.
Try things. So for some people, yellow paper works better than white paper, for them to process information. So don't be afraid of trying things. And yeah, I mean, so for me, for sure, Chinese medicine, hugely important. Chiropractors were amazing with that. Like I had no idea what they could do. They were phenomenal, things like therapeutic touch and so on, but I'd say like they were really important. So I had an interesting naturopath at one time. The colonics was kind of a weird journey. The main thing that was interesting there is when they said, I don't think you have Crohn's colitis. Like, so to this day, I'm like, what does that actually mean? Because at some level, I kind of believe that person. I like,
Mm-hmm.
so it made
Mm-hmm.
it more healable. Like, but again, what is Crohn's? Like, they don't even know anyway. I've never had biopsies where they take it and they say, what is this thing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, it's like I learned more about the healing and less about the actual disease. So I'd
Mm-hmm.
say I still, in a way, for example, last year they wanted to put me on these immunotherapy things again. Okay, I have no symptoms. And it's $60,000 to $100,000 a year, and they're going to get some insurance plan that's underwritten. And it's 5 years. I was going to have to go every 2 months for IVs and everything. And this freaked me out like so much. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going, okay, like, is that something I'm an idiot if I don't do it? And then I did so I had to get all these shots. So I went along with all those things with my doctor because I didn't want to be non-compliant and because I'm freaking, I'm like, why? What is this all about? And then he didn't really care that I didn't do it. The other thing I looked at too is they have what is this potential like for very, very sick people. So this is something you keep in your pocket if you are very, very sick, fecal transplants. So this is what they do with people with C. difficile, which is
Mm-hmm.
amazing. So C. difficile like killed my dad. If you're very frail, it can kill you. But with the fecal transplants, what happens is you have to be careful because you will get whatever that person had. So if the person's depressive, if they're fat, so it can be a life-saving thing. But it's again, caution has to be exercised around. It's not a neutral thing because what we're learning now is the impact of the microbiome. Like, so the
Mm-hmm.
microbiome, we are more microbiome than we are ourselves. And that's sort of the most fascinating like thing
Mm-hmm.
to me that. But if you're dealing with it, I mean, the simple thing is keep your own medical records, keep your own files, like look at your blood work, like inform yourself. And then because that gives you power too.
Right.
And then a lot of times like I say, in the medical system, had huge terrors about refusing things, and nobody really cared. You're the one who's living with whatever you're living with.
Right.
And it is terrifying. So don't diminish the magnitude of that kind of terror because it's terrifying. And then it's exhilarating when things can kind of go the other way, I guess. And then for me, the other piece that was hugely important too is having a creative outlet, I'd say. So for me, that was massive in terms of pain management, in terms of insight. There were times that I could not make myself heard or understood.
Mm-hmm.
And that was even replicated when I broke my hip. Like the ER guy did not believe me because I wasn't histrionic. I go to a very focused, unhistrionic part of, so ladies, scream, yell,
Right. Right.
because people don't hear you if you don't play that game. So when someone can hear you and then work with you, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's so rewarding. But there were times that I really could not make myself heard in or understood.
Using your voice, being informed about what your options are, what your
Yeah.
medical history dictates, remaining open. So I think that's essentially what you're saying is remaining open to trying different things because you just never know. You never know what is going to work for you. What worked for you, Kathy, and what worked for me may not work for the next person, but
Yeah.
there may be 15 other people
Clue.
who it does work for. So
Yeah.
if those 15 people, those 16 people don't try it, then they'll never know whether or not that could be something that could have supported them in their own healing journeys.
And then practice self-compassion, because it's very daunting to take on that journey. You know what I mean? It's daunting. And then
It
find a
is.
few allies. And you don't need a lot of allies. You just need a few. Like that's the
Mhm.
other thing. It's like you don't, you just need a few.
A little
And
support network as you move through, for sure.
yeah, did not have good boundaries. I could not do family law. That's part of what made me sick too, right? With the asthma, it's because like, I take on all my clients' pain, like didn't have really good ways of managing that, right?
Hmm.
We're learning things all the time. And I do take that other approach, like Chinese medicine, the least strong medicine first.
Hmm.
you sort of work your way back to the big problem.
Right, because
Whereas
once you cut, you're not getting it back.
yeah. Once you're on major drug, like, it doesn't matter if like they're drugs that change you forever, right?
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
you want to kind of and it's just be gentle. And then shamanic is always about be gentle and show up, show up for
Hmm.
yourself. But that thing about not having a voice is like, it's not you who's crazy. People choose to not hear you
Hmm.
sometimes.
Hmm.
So just know that that can happen, and then don't give up. Don't give up.
Yes,
Play
yes.
good music. Get really good
Yes.
music.
Yes. Find the things that help you to shift out of that mindset or that space that you're in as well when you're
Yeah.
there. But that's great. That's great. And and if you're not creative in say a writing aspect like you, there are many, many forms of creativity that people can use as an outlet as well. So I think, and whether it's dancing, for me, dancing and moving my body is always really, really, important. Those are really great recommendations, Kathy, based on your own experience. And I know that IBS and Crohn's and all of these disorders of the GI system right now, there's a lot of people who likely have it who don't even know at this point. And so those people who are feeling, imbalanced out there, something's wrong. It's important to do some of your own investigating and
Yeah.
to look into, because food sensitivities are often very high on those charts. Work with a holistic nutritionist, a naturopathic doctor, somebody who can help support you in those, because many of these things can be reversible. There are points that it becomes more difficult to reverse because some damage
Yeah. Yeah.
eventually
Yeah.
can be irreversible. So it's important, if you feel that there's an imbalance early on, to address it. So thank you, Kathy.
And then just one thing I want to add is the fermented things, because one thing that
Yes.
the old people in my life did, they all lived to 98, 99. And I really studied centenarians, right? So they like vinegar and water. If you
Hmm.
don't drink alcohol, blood thinner, eat kimchi,
Hmm.
sauerkraut, yogurt,
Yes,
all that stuff,
you
right?
got
And,
it.
and then really, and avoid sugar, like in moderation. But
Everything.
I really feel like studying old people, how they live to like fantastic old lives, is it's not about denying yourself stuff. It's about embracing. And the other thing is, even if I eat pizza and I'm going to be sick, sometimes you have to do the thing that's going to make you bad because you need it for your spirit. So sometimes it's worth having something that's going to make you sick for a day. Who cares? Because you need to live your life. Like
I
you have
agree.
to live.
And you're doing it from an informed perspective that way too,
Yeah.
right? You understand the consequence, you make the
Yeah.
choice and you deal with the consequence, right? And that
Yeah.
that comes later on down the journey when you understand kind of the fundamental of the way that your body operates, and then you get to make choices based on that. You're not in that kind of pit of dis-ease when you're trying to figure out and you just don't know. So thank you so much for joining today, Kathy, and for sharing your story and all of the wealth of information that you brought, because I know it's going to be helpful for people, particularly, a lot of people who are suffering digestive imbalances, disorders. Some are going to know it, some people aren't, and maybe this will be the catalyst that will help them to look a little bit deeper to see if there are things that aren't operating optimally for them based on your story that you've shared with us today. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for doing this and for, sharing your wisdom and knowledge with people.
My pleasure, and it's truly an honor. And I'm meeting so many amazing souls on this journey who are telling their stories and all the different correlations that I'm making, even with these small sample sizes. It's really interesting to talk to people and hear that our journeys are different, yet there are lots of similarities, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. And
For sure.
miigwech, as we say.
Yes, miigwech, Kathy. It was an honor.
Thanks for joining me today for Food Feels and Banana Peels. I hope you enjoyed the show and will tune in next week for a new guest, a new opportunity to learn and grow. It's an honor always to be a part of your journey. You can rate this podcast on Apple and Spotify, which will help it to be available to more people. You can now check out Food Feels and Banana Peels on YouTube too. Together we can inspire people to make healthy changes and advocate for themselves in a different way. Knowledge is power, and I hope you'll share yours. Be well, and until next time.